My name is Elsie, and the baby shower at a vineyard in Napa Valley was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Over 60 guests, the sunset painting the rows of grapes gold, laughter ringing in the air. But just minutes later, in the middle of the toasts, my husband, Mark, stood up, asked everyone for their attention, and handed me an envelope. Not a congratulatory card. A divorce petition. He announced to everyone that I was unstable, unfit to be a mother, and that he would be seeking full custody of our child. Have you ever been stabbed in the back by the person you trusted most, right in the middle of your most beautiful moment? If you know that feeling, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to follow me to the very end of this story. Because what happened next, no one at that party could have imagined. I met Mark on an autumn afternoon, when the renovation project for an office building in the financial district was in its final stage. He arrived as the lead investor, white shirt perfectly fitted, silver gray tie, a confident stride, and a smile that could light up any room. I was the project manager, used to tense meetings and dry budget numbers. But Mark was different. He knew how to listen, when to throw in a joke to ease the tension, and more importantly, he made me feel like I was the only woman in his line of sight. In the following meetings, he often found a way to sit next to me, asking not only about work progress but also about the smallest details in my life, like how I always ordered my latte with extra cinnamon or loved listening to jazz when working late. When the project ended, he invited me to dinner at a small Italian restaurant by the bay. I remember the golden lights falling across the table, the red wine swirling in the glass, and his warm voice sharing his dream of building coastal communities where every home held family memories. I thought maybe this was the man I could walk through life with. We fell in love quickly but deeply. Mark was the kind of man who always knew how to create memorable moments. A surprise trip to Napa to see the grapes ripen, a picnic on the sand even as the ocean wind tangled my hair. After a year, he proposed. Our wedding was held on the Santa Cruz shore. Salt in the air, waves breaking, and me walking in a long white gown, thinking I was stepping into a fairy tale. The house we bought afterward was a dream too. An old home with a balcony overlooking the ocean, brick walls weathered by time, and a living room wide enough for the vintage piano I loved. Mark said he wanted this to be where we'd raise our children, where every dinner would be filled with laughter and the smell of fresh bread. I believed every word. Then I got pregnant. When the test showed 2 lines, I cried in his arms. Mark held me tight, whispering that this would be the most beautiful new chapter of our lives. But within weeks, I began to notice small cracks. At first, he came home later than usual, saying the new project in San Jose needed his oversight. I didn't suspect anything. We still had breakfast together, he still asked if I'd slept well, still brushed his hand lightly across my back as he passed by. But gradually, those touches faded and breakfasts were replaced by a hurried note left on the kitchen counter. Left early. Don't forget your vitamins. His phone, which used to sit on the table or charging stand, was now always in his pocket, screen face down. When a message came in, he'd step into another room to reply. I asked, and he gave a tight smile. Work stuff, don't worry. But what unsettled me most wasn't his explanations. It was Sharon, Mark's sister. They had always been close, but lately I saw them whispering more, stopping the moment I entered. Sharon began showing up at our house at odd hours, carrying documents they needed to review together. One evening, while I was organizing my home office, I heard Mark and Sharon on the porch. Their voices dropped low, mentioning transfer and secure. When I stepped out, they both fell silent, and Mark awkwardly asked if I wanted ice cream. I told myself maybe I was being too sensitive. Pregnancy was changing my body, making my emotions swing. I remembered my mother's words, "Family is the most important thing, you have to keep it together." So I let it go, though a dark cloud kept growing inside me. In the following weeks, that darkness deepened. Mark began taking more business trips, sometimes all weekend. I stayed home alone, sitting on the balcony watching waves crash against the shore, my hand resting on my belly, feeling the tiny life growing inside me. I wanted to believe he was working for our future. But one night, while tidying the bedroom, I found a hotel receipt from Sacramento, dated exactly when he said he was in San Jose. I held the paper, my heart pounding, but then folded it away. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not because I feared the truth, but because I feared that asking would mean losing everything. I didn't know then that my silence was becoming a crucial piece of a plan I couldn't yet imagine. And Mark, the man I once thought would protect me, was quietly pushing me toward the edge piece by piece. One Monday morning, Sharon appeared at my door unannounced. She wore a deep blue dress, carrying a thick stack of documents, her perfume so sharp it made me uncomfortable the moment I opened the door. Sharon smiled as if this were a friendly visit, but her eyes were calculating. "You know," she began, her voice deceptively gentle, "once you go on maternity leave, finances can get tricky. Mark's busy with a big project. I thought, maybe I could help you manage things so you're less stressed." I froze. "Manage my finances?" Sharon slid the stack toward me. "Just a few small papers, so I can temporarily hold certain accounts in case you can't handle them." I flipped through a few pages. The legal terms were dense, but certain phrases jumped out at me. Transfer of ownership, full authorization, irrevocable assets. "Sharon, this isn't small. Why would I need to transfer the house and my design company to you?" She gave a soft laugh as if I'd told a joke. "Elsie, don't be so tense. This is to protect you. Pregnant women can be emotional. If something happens, at least the assets are safe." "Safe, but no longer mine?" She shrugged and changed the subject, asking about baby names. But that smile, the way she dodged, told me this wasn't simple concern. A few days later, my mother-in-law, Patricia, stopped by. She was usually soft-spoken, but that day as I brewed tea, she dropped a casual line. "Elsie, some women shouldn't be mothers if they can't control their emotions." "What do you mean?" She sipped her tea. "I'm only thinking of the baby. Mark says you've been overly anxious, crying, losing sleep. Pregnant women need stability." I gripped the teapot handle, feeling her words land like an unspoken indictment. Patricia had never directly criticized me before, but today it felt rehearsed. That night, on my way to the kitchen for water, I heard Mark and Sharon in the back porch. Mark's voice was low and urgent. "We need the contracts signed before she gives birth. The transfer has to happen as soon as possible." Sharon replied, "I've got the paperwork ready. We need Elsie's signature. But if she suspects, it'll get messy." I stood hidden behind the curtain, those words echoing in my mind. Mark spoke again, dropping his voice even further. "Let Mom talk to her. Apply some pressure. If necessary, I'll use the mental health angle. The law will side with me." I had to brace myself against the wall to keep my balance. It had gone far beyond a gut feeling. This was a plan. Deliberate, calculated, and I was the target. That night, I lay staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Every piece began to click into place. Sharon's unannounced visits, the knowing glances between the siblings when I walked into a room, Patricia's remark, and all of Mark's last-minute business trips. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a chess game that had been rigged for me to lose from the start. But the girl who once believed in fairy tales on our wedding day was gone. My child was growing inside me with each passing day. I couldn't sit still and let them take everything. The next morning, I called an old friend, Michael, who had worked as a private investigator before opening a security firm. We met at a small cafe near the beach, a place I knew Mark would never set foot in. "Elsie, you sound tense. What's going on?" Michael asked, looking at me with genuine concern. I told him briefly. The documents Sharon had brought, my mother-in-law's words, and the conversation I'd overheard. He didn't interrupt, just nodded and took notes. "What do you want me to do?" "I need to know what Mark and Sharon are doing behind my back. Who's involved? And, if possible, I want proof. Proof strong enough to protect me and my child." Michael leaned back, a flash of resolve in his eyes. "You know, most people come to me when it's already too late. But you're right on time." We made a plan. Michael would track Mark on his business trips, investigate financial transactions involving Sharon and Patricia, and find out if they had an attorney working for them. I went back home trying to stay calm. Mark still smiled, still asked what I wanted for dinner as if nothing was wrong. But I realized I was learning to wear a mask too. I answered with steady words, nodded at the right moments, smiled enough, exactly how he had been with me for months. Every night, once he was asleep, I opened my laptop and documented everything. Dates, times, words, looks, and every document I saw. I knew that to deal with Mark, I needed more than emotions. I needed a complete file, like a case in which I was both the witness and the plaintiff. In the days that followed, Michael started sending me coded texts. Confirmed. Sacramento, not San Jose. Closed door meeting with attorney on Friday. Large transfer from joint account to account in Sharon's name. Each line was a stab but also a weapon I was collecting. I knew the day was coming, soon, when I'd use them. And when I did, everything would change. The hum of chatter in the wide room suddenly went silent when Mark snapped his fingers at the event staff. The large screen behind us lit up and my face appeared, flushed, hair disheveled, voice high and urgent, like someone completely out of control. I recognized it instantly. It was from 2 months ago, the night I found that hotel receipt Mark had lied about. I had cried, screamed, and he had stood there, unmoving. But in this video his words were cut out, leaving only the image of me shouting in desperation. A perfect piece of evidence for the story he wanted to tell. I heard a few snickers from the back rows. A group of women whispered, hands covering their mouths, eyes filled with pity mixed with disdain. In the front row, Sharon sat upright, phone held high, live streaming the entire scene. Her face glowed as if she were watching a masterfully staged play. Mark stepped forward, his voice even, like a well-rehearsed statement. This is only a small part of what I've endured. The beach house and the company are both in my name. He will leave with nothing. I will ensure the best interests of our child. I could feel dozens of eyes on me. A few old friends avoided my gaze as if afraid to be pulled into the storm. Others looked straight at me, but in their eyes was doubt, not trust. Maybe Mark was right. I tightened my hand over my stomach, feeling the tiny heartbeat within. I wanted to respond, to shout that this was all lies. But I knew if I did, I'd fall right into the trap he'd set. Patricia, my mother-in-law, sat beside Sharon, giving a slow, regretful shake of her head. A perfect performance of the concerned mother thinking of her son and unborn grandchild. She leaned over to whisper something to the person next to her, enough for me to see their smirk. The air in the room felt suffocating. The faint clinks of glasses, a low murmur of sighs, the static hum from the speakers as the video ended, all blending into a sound so unpleasant it made me want to leave immediately. But I stood still. Mark turned toward me, smiling thinly but coldly. Elsie, do you have anything to say? Or should we let the truth speak for itself? I took a deep breath, keeping my eyes locked on him. I knew any reaction could be recorded, edited, and used against me. From where Sharon sat, the glow of her phone screen lit her face, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. A voice came from the crowd. It was Carla, a college friend I hadn't seen in years. Mark, this is a baby shower, not a courtroom. Carla, sometimes the truth needs to be told, especially when so many people don't know the real face of someone. I saw Carla start to say something else but stop when Sharon pointed her camera at her. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Everything around me seemed to move in slow motion. The warm yellow light falling across the rows of chairs, the scent of pastries from the buffet table, the faint clink of silverware, and in the middle of it all, me standing like someone put on public trial. Mark stepped forward again, holding another stack of papers. I've also prepared financial records so everyone understands the situation. Elsie is no longer capable of managing her company. For the greater good, I will take over completely. I glanced at the papers. They were spreadsheets, edited reports, and a few handwritten notes from Sharon. I recognized her handwriting instantly. He paused, eyes brushing over me before turning back to the crowd. This isn't an easy decision, but it's necessary. I want my child to grow up in a stable environment, free from the emotional instability of their mother. The words, spoken calmly, were a knife straight into me. I heard someone in the crowd murmur, "Poor baby." Another replied, "But what if he's telling the truth?" I stayed still, my hands still over my belly, but in my mind, every memory and every piece of evidence I had gathered flashed past. I knew I couldn't strike now. Not in the middle of a crowd leaning toward his side. Sharon lowered her phone, whispered to Patricia, and both of them smiled. That image seared into my memory, not to fuel hatred but to remind me this wasn't helplessness. It was preparation. Mark ended his speech with a polished line, like it had been written for him. I hope everyone respects this decision and keeps what's best for the child in mind. Sparse applause followed, mostly from his friends and business partners. The rest stayed silent or glanced at me before looking away. I knew the real storm hadn't started yet. And when it did, everyone in this room would see exactly who had truly lost control, and who had been waiting for the right moment to strike. I remained in the noisy party room, but in my head, it was quiet. Mark's words, Sharon's gloating eyes, the murmurs of the guests, all felt like they were happening in another world. My heart no longer raced from shock. 6 weeks ago I had prepared for this moment. I remembered the day Michael, the investigator I trusted, brought me a thick file, placing it on my kitchen counter. Outside, rain poured heavily, the sound mixing with the rustle of paper as I turned each page. "This is everything you need to understand exactly what they're doing," Michael said, his voice low and firm. The first page was a copy of the transfer contracts for the interior design firm I'd inherited from my father, signed over to Mark and Sharon. Forged signatures, a notary seal faint but still enough to make the documents valid if I hadn't caught them in time. I ran my hand over the corner of the page, trying to stay calm. "How long have they been doing this?" Michael flipped to another stack of papers. "Started 3 months ago, right after you announced your pregnancy. And not only that." He pushed a second file toward me. "Statements from my father's trust account. Regular withdrawals, tens of thousands at a time, transferred to another account in Sharon's name. In total, over $200,000. I sat in silence, my fingers gripping the edge of the counter. "And Mark thinks I'd never find out?" "They think you're too busy preparing for the baby, too trusting of family to notice. But now." He left the sentence hanging, his eyes reminding me I was holding a knife sharp enough to end their entire game. That night, after Michael left, I pulled up my phone and searched for the number of Elaine Carter, a family asset attorney who had once helped my father in a complicated lawsuit. Elaine picked up almost immediately. "Elsie, it's been a while. What's going on?" I gave her the short version. Elaine was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Listen, the first thing you need to do is secure all original documents related to the assets. Do you still have your father's will?" I suddenly remembered the small safe in my mother's basement where I had once stored the old will, the one Mark had never seen. In that will, the company and the trust were clearly stated as mine alone, and they could not be transferred without my own signed consent. 3 days later, I went to Elaine's office. She examined each page carefully, her eyes growing more resolute. "This will is pure gold, Elsie. But we need to have it notarized again, reaffirm its legal validity, and store it somewhere secure. You could open a bank safe deposit box that only you have access to." The next morning, I went to a bank branch in downtown Santa Cruz and rented a large safe deposit box. The feeling of placing the will and all the important documents inside was like building a solid wall around the rest of my life. From that day, I began living 2 parallel lives. By day, I still smiled when Mark asked how I was, still let Sharon happen to drop by with her financial advice. But at night, I sat in my home office with Elaine, reviewing every detail: the withdrawals, the forged contracts, even internal company emails Michael had secretly obtained, where Mark and Sharon openly discussed removing Elsie from the equation. Once, Elaine placed her hand on the file. "You understand, right? When they attack in public, you cannot react impulsively. Everything you need to say must be said at the moment. That leaves them no time to recover." In the following days, Michael continued providing updates. One night he called me. "Mark just met with another lawyer in San Jose. I overheard them discussing using your argument video as psychological evidence. Brace yourself, Elsie." "Thanks, Michael. You're right, I've braced myself. But they don't know I've prepared far more than that." During that time, I also carefully arranged to meet with a few people who would be at the baby shower. Old friends, a couple of Mark's business partners, and even his grandmother, Margaret. I didn't tell them the whole truth, only planted a few questions, a few details to make them pay closer attention to how Mark and Sharon behaved. Every step I took, every word I spoke was calculated. I was no longer the confused woman bewildered by her husband's strange changes. I had become someone quietly gathering each piece so that when the full picture emerged, it wouldn't prove my innocence. It would expose their true faces to everyone. The air in the party room felt compressed, filled only with the low hum of small conversations and eyes darting toward me. Mark was still going on about his sacrifice, when a husky but clear voice came from the third row. "That's enough, Mark." Everyone turned. Margaret, Mark's grandmother, rose slowly. She was 82, small in stature, but her blue-gray eyes were as sharp and bright as the day I first met her. She had always been quiet at family gatherings, usually sitting with a gentle smile. But today her voice rang steady. "You are a disgrace to this family." Mark flinched, his mouth parting slightly in disbelief. Patricia, my mother-in-law, quickly placed a hand over Margaret's, speaking softly, "Mother, this isn't the time." Margaret brushed her hand away, eyes locked on Mark. "I've lived long enough to see the true nature of my own kin. I know exactly what you and Sharon have done. Don't think I don't know about the transfer of Elsie's assets. And don't imagine I will sit quietly while you destroy a woman carrying my great-grandchild." A few muted gasps rippled through the crowd. Mark's face flushed, though he tried to maintain a smile. "Grandma, I think you're misunderstanding." Silence. Her interruption was calm but firm enough to shut down any defense. I looked at her, a swell of gratitude and relief rising in me. Margaret was respected by the entire family. Her words carried a weight no one could dismiss. Then from the left side of the room another familiar figure stood. Richard Cole, an elderly attorney who had been my father's close friend for decades, the man I still called Uncle Richard. Leaning on his cane, he took a few steps forward, his voice slow but each word clear. "I kept quiet because I thought this was a private family matter. But no. I can't." He turned to address the room, especially Mark's guests. "I worked with Elsie's father for over 20 years. I know exactly who owns that interior design company. And I know that not a single signature is valid for transfer without Elsie's direct consent." Mark turned sharply toward him. "You don't know the whole story." "I know enough to understand," Richard continued, "that there are forged signatures on contracts and unauthorized withdrawals from the trust account. I've seen the statements, and I'm prepared to testify." A wave of murmurs swept the room. Several of Mark's guests exchanged uneasy glances. Sharon, still live-streaming, quickly lowered her phone, her face pale. Margaret turned to the crowd, her eyes glinting. "You all came here to celebrate the arrival of a child. And yet my grandson has turned it into a stage to humiliate that child's mother. If anyone here thinks this is the right thing to do, speak now." A few chairs scraped as some guests quietly rose and moved toward the back as if to distance themselves from Mark. I saw Carla, my college friend who had spoken up earlier, step closer and rest her hand lightly on my shoulder. The touch wasn't comfort, it was a reminder. I finally had someone by my side. Mark tried to smile, but the corners of his mouth trembled. "Grandma, Uncle Richard, you don't understand the full context." "The only context here," Richard cut in, "is a man trying to use his pregnant wife's mental state to strip her of her assets and her right to be a mother. And I won't stand by without speaking up." Margaret slowly turned to me. "Elsie, if you have something to say, now's the time." I took a deep breath, scanning the room. Many faces had lost the suspicion they once held. Now they looked expectant, even encouraging. I caught sight of Michael, the investigator, standing among the crowd near the door. He gave me a small nod. A young woman in the back row, one of Mark's business partners, suddenly spoke up. "Mark, is this true? Did you transfer money from your wife's trust?" Mark turned, his tone sharp. "That's a private matter." "No," Margaret said firmly, "that's a matter of integrity. And integrity is never private." The atmosphere in the room had completely shifted. If before Mark had controlled the narrative, now he was on the defensive. The eyes that once looked at me with doubt were now locked on him. This wasn't the crescendo I had planned, but it was the clearest signal yet. The moment I had been waiting for was near. And when it came, I would tell everything from start to finish in front of every person here. I slipped my hand into my ivory clutch, my fingers brushing the edge of the envelope I had prepared weeks ago. The slight texture of the paper under my fingertips, the faint scent of ink and old paper. It was the smell of something I knew would change everything. Perhaps everyone should know the full truth, not just what Mark chooses to show. Mark let out a short, mocking laugh. "Elsie, do you really want to humiliate yourself further in front of everyone?" I slowly pulled out the envelope and held it up. "This is my father's original will, along with the ownership certificates for the interior design company, the beach house, and the majority of the assets. All in my name, non-transferable without my signature. And as you can see, I have never signed." The room buzzed. A few guests in the back leaned forward to get a better view. I stepped to a nearby table, opened the envelope, and laid out each document for those in the front row to see clearly. Sharon's face drained of color as she whispered something to Mark, but I didn't give them the chance to respond. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. "And this," I said, keeping my eyes on them, is the recording of Mark and Sharon speaking to each other less than a month ago. Mark's voice came through the speakers cold and clear. She's vulnerable right now. This is the best time. If we have her committed to a psychiatric facility for a few weeks, we can get custody easily. Sharon's voice answered without a trace of hesitation. I've found a cooperative doctor. Just sign and they'll keep her for treatment. After that, the assets will be safe. I saw a few people raise their hands to cover their mouths, others looking at Mark not with doubt anymore but with outrage. Mark stepped forward, his voice sharp. You recorded me illegally. In this state, only one party's consent is required. And I was part of that conversation. Mark, you'd do better to remember the law than try to twist it. A quiet chuckle came from a corner of the room, not mocking me but laughing because he had trapped himself. I pulled a neatly clipped set of photos from my bag. And if you still claim that everything you've done was for the family, I flipped to the first photo, then explain why you were at the Ritz-Carlton with your business partner on the exact night you said you were in San Jose on business. The photo showed Mark and a woman in a red dress, her arm around his neck, both of them smiling with wine glasses in hand. The murmurs in the room grew louder. I didn't stop. The second photo, them walking into a hotel room. The third, having breakfast together on the balcony. This is the partner you said you only met to talk business? I asked, my tone even but my eyes sharp. Mark stepped back half a pace, his hand clenched. Sharon lowered her head, avoiding everyone's gaze. From the middle rows, a man's voice spoke. It was Brian, one of Mark's major investors. Mark, if what she's saying is true, you didn't betray your wife. You lied to all of us about why you missed key meetings. Another woman, a potential business partner, stood, taking out her phone. I think I'll cancel the contract we were about to sign. I don't do business with people like this. The room began to break into chaos. Some guests quickly walked out, phones to their ears, speaking in hushed tones as if relaying news to someone. A few younger attendees didn't hesitate to pull out their phones and start recording everything. I saw Carla walk over to Margaret, whisper something, and Margaret nodded, her eyes never leaving Mark. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice carrying full authority. Mark, do you have anything to say? Because if you don't, what we've just heard and seen is enough for this family to know exactly who you are. Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His whole body was tense, as if searching for words but finding nothing. Sharon put her hand on his, but he pulled away, his face flushed crimson. I could feel every eye shift off me and lock onto him. Everything he had built over months to humiliate me was crumbling in the very party he had intended as my public downfall. I want everyone to know, I began, my voice calm but carrying, that I have officially filed for full custody. The court has signed an emergency order barring Mark from contacting me or the child during the investigation. I know some will ask why I don't want to settle or keep the peace for the child. But when someone goes to every length to strip you of motherhood, to smear your name and to exploit your trust, I can't treat that as a mistake to forgive. I will not forgive. A short silence followed before I added, my voice lowering, but I also won't make myself into someone like him. I won't destroy him further. I'll let the law do its work. And I trust that justice will come. In the front row, Sharon suddenly shot to her feet. Her face was pale, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. No one stopped her as she hurriedly grabbed her bag and nearly ran to the door. The sharp clack of her heels echoed across the floor, blending with the whispers of a few guests. Patricia, my mother-in-law, called after her. Sharon, come back here. But the door slammed shut. I kept my gaze on Mark. He looked at me as if seeing for the first time that the woman standing before him was no longer the wife he could easily manipulate. The defiance in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something closer to worry and fear. Richard Cole stepped forward, leaning on his cane but speaking with full strength. Elsie, I will represent you legally. And I can assure you the evidence today is strong enough to protect you and the baby. Margaret stood too, bracing a hand on her chair, her sharp gaze fixed on Mark. I've been silent too long and that was my mistake. But from this day forward you'll answer for everything you've done. Mark tried to keep his voice even, but I could see his breathing quicken. Elsie, you're destroying everything. No, Mark. You've been doing that for a long time. I'm simply stopping you to protect myself and our child. In the corner, Michael, the investigator, quietly gave me a thumbs up before stepping toward the door. leaving me to face Mark in the charged space between us. I turned to the room, my voice softer but still steady. I'm not asking anyone to choose sides. I'm only asking that those who've heard and seen today remember the truth. Then I stepped back, leaving the center of the room so that every gaze shifted naturally from me to Mark. He stayed in place, more alone than I'd ever seen him, without Sharon, without applause. The back door opened slightly, a cold breeze rushing in, carrying the feeling that everything had begun to shift, no longer following his script. And I knew I had ended the game Mark had started. A month later, the winter waves in Santa Cruz still crashed against the rocks as if nothing beyond them had happened. But for me, everything had changed. Mark was formally summoned by investigators for financial fraud, both in his own company and for withdrawing money from my trust. The story appeared in the local paper and on several business news sites, accompanied by a photo of him leaving the federal building, his face tight. I didn't feel glee, but I didn't feel pain anymore either. That was the law's job, and I had let it do its part. Meanwhile, my design company took a turn I once never dared to imagine. After appearing on a television program about legal rights for pregnant women, I received a flood of emails from strangers. Some sharing their own stories, others offering collaboration. 3 major contracts came in almost at once. A lakeside resort in Oregon, a coffee shop chain in Seattle, and a boutique hotel in San Francisco. I decided to move permanently into the beach house Mark once thought he could take from me. The old wooden floors were polished, the large windows replaced to open up the ocean view. The living room, once the site of many arguments, became a reading nook with an armchair, bookshelves, and the scent of roasted coffee mingling with the salty breeze. The lower floor of the house I turned into an interior design studio combined with a small cafe. The cafe served locals and tourists, while the studio became the place I met clients, showcased design samples, and hosted workshops on creating living spaces. On opening day, the sky was scrubbed blue, and the sea breeze was crisp and cool. A neighbor brought a bouquet of lavender, and Carla helped me hang the wooden sign, Shoreline Studio Cafe, above the door. Margaret arrived early, wearing a cream wool coat, holding my baby girl in her arms. The little one slept soundly on her shoulder, her tiny face peaceful, as if she had never felt the storm that had passed. "You've turned this place into something beautiful," Margaret said, taking in the new space while gently rocking the baby. "I want this to be a place where people can come and feel calm, the same peace I've found after everything." She studied me for a long moment before nodding slightly. "The best thing you've done isn't winning back your assets or the case. It's keeping your heart from hardening." By afternoon, the flow of customers had grown. A young couple asked about design services for their new apartment, and a middle-aged woman stopped at the counter to thank me, saying the story I'd shared on television had given her the courage to leave a toxic relationship. I listened, took notes, and offered them a cup of hot coffee. In those moments, I realized I wasn't rebuilding my career. I was building a community around me. People came here not only for a service or a cup of coffee, but for a bit of hope and connection. Late in the day, I carried my daughter onto the porch and sat in the wooden chair my father used to love. The waves rolled steadily, the scent of the sea threading through my hair. Margaret still sat nearby, knitting, glancing up at her great-granddaughter with warmth. Carla was at the counter, wiping down the espresso machine while humming softly. In the sound of waves, the hum of laughter, and the rich aroma of coffee, I knew I had found something Mark would never understand. A life that needed no power, no control, yet was strong enough to stand and gentle enough to love. In that scene, I thought of the backyard of this house, once the epicenter of a storm. So many prying eyes, so many lies had been flung there. But now, looking through the glass door, I saw green grass, strings of small lights Carla and I had hung that morning, wooden tables polished to a shine, and bright yellow sunflowers catching the ocean breeze. I smiled. Tomorrow that space would host a very different baby shower. No script designed to humiliate me, no words meant to strip me of motherhood. Only friends, neighbors, and those who had seen me through the storm, raising a glass to the new chapter for my daughter and me. In the sunset glow, with the waves as background music, I realized I wasn't just coming back. I was rewriting my own memory, turning a place once steeped in hurt into a symbol of peace and new beginnings. The next afternoon, my backyard was alive as if it had never known the shadow of the past. The sea breeze skimmed over rows of sunflowers, and tiny string lights twinkled in the late-day sun. Carla had set up long wooden tables covered in white cloth, each topped with glass jars full of golden daisies and sprigs of pale lavender. The scent of fresh pastries from the cafe's kitchen lingered in the air. Margaret arrived early, carrying a newly knitted blanket soft and smelling of soap, made for her great-granddaughter. She sat in a wooden chair near the steps, cradling the baby, softly rocking her while watching everyone prepare. Close friends, neighbors, and even a few loyal customers from the cafe arrived one by one. No one brought cameras or suspicious glances, only smiles, kind words, and small, carefully wrapped gifts. Children ran around laughing, their voices mixing with the sound of waves in the distance. When everyone was seated, I stepped into the center of the yard holding a bundle of neatly tied yellow balloons. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of sea air and flowers fill my lungs. I know, I began, my eyes meeting each face. This place once witnessed a difficult chapter in my life. But today I want my daughter, and all of us, to remember that the past does not decide our worth. We can turn a place that once hurt us into a place of joy and turn wounds into strength. I handed out the balloons, Margaret holding the first, Carla the next, and then the others. The look in their eyes told me they understood the meaning of this afternoon. When I counted down, the yard fell silent. Then all at once the yellow balloons rose, slowly at first, then faster, drifting high into the pale blue sky. The sunset lit them up like tiny suns. My daughter opened her eyes, watching them, her tiny hands waving in the air. I bent down, kissed her forehead, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Sometimes the person who tries to make you a victim ends up making you a warrior. And the greatest reward is realizing you don't need them to live a beautiful life." Someone lifted a camera, not to post online but to keep as a memory. I stood there, under the gold against the sky, knowing I had truly reclaimed this space, not as a battlefield of pain, but as a symbol of freedom and new beginnings. I know each of us has our own backyard. Maybe a place, a memory, or a relationship that once caused pain but later became the starting point of our strength. My story is one example. What about you? Have you ever had to turn a loss into a chance to stand strong? If you have, I'd love to hear it, because you never know, your experience might give strength to someone who needs it right now. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe stories about family, resilience, and recovery deserve to be shared, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I'll keep bringing you true, heartfelt, and hopeful stories about how we overcome challenges, and in the process find ourselves and the people we love.